When I got engaged, my mother and my grandmother began the process of telling my wife the family stories. She now knows more about the family than I do. She knows the stories that I lived through, oblivious, because nobody bothers to share what's actually going on with a 3-year-old. We're born into a family narrative, a collection of stories, and sometimes we have to work really hard to put that all together. Hello, my name is Stephen Murray, and this is What We Leave Behind. We're going to share stories of family legacy, personal identity, and how those sometimes come into conflict with each other. And in our first story, Sean Ewart is going to explore what it means to connect with a family member on their own terms.
I know what it's like to not have a friend in the world. Because of my mother's mental illness, we moved a lot. I went to 5 different elementary schools. And I got to tell you, I am really good at being the new kid. So by the time I hit 7th grade, I end up friendless from all these moves. I'm 13, sweaty, stinky, with huge curly hair. So in an effort to make some friends, I decide to audition for a musical. So my name is called, I walk to my spot, the piano starts, and I sing Happy Birthday. Then silence. So from where I'm standing, all I see on the other side of the piano is a tight bun of gray hair. And finally, a woman's voice says, "You can't sing. You'll never be able to sing." So I leave, I go home. Well, luckily for me, they don't have enough males. And my wall phone rings in the kitchen, and I have the part. I'm the king and the princess and the magic pea, and I have to sing a song. But the problem is, I've never been in a play before. I don't know how to sing, and my voice is changing daily. So I think about asking my mother for some help. But when I was in 1st grade, we made a very adult decision that I would be the one in charge of all my homework. She wasn't going to help me. She made it very clear that her mental illness was not going to allow her to help me. But I'm so desperate, I ask her anyway. So like a Hollywood agent thinking about taking on a new actor, she mulls over my casting situation. My mother sort of scopes me out from across the kitchen table. She adjusts the pale pink fuzzy bathrobe that she never takes off. She sighs and paces. She twists her long black hair. She looks through her pile of paper to see if, like, maybe she has a calendar opening or something. So finally she goes, "Fine, I'll do it." And I say, "Do what?" And she says, "I'll coach you." I'm like, "How?" And she says, "I'll teach you how to sing and act. I know what I'm doing." And I say, but what if I'm scared to go on stage, or I don't know what I'm going to say, or I can't remember anything? And she says, "Well, that's all part of performing. That's part of the risk. It could go poorly, but it may not. It's not a reason not to try. And more often than not, you'll be good and everyone will love you." And then my mother takes my hands, looks me straight in the eye, and says, "Please let me do this for you. It's the only thing I have to give you." I'm taken by surprise. She really wants to help me. I mean, I feel like for the first time what it's like to have my mother engaged in my life. I'm so giddy. I say, "Yes, yes, yes, please." So my mother teaches me how to sing. She shows me how notes go up and notes go down. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I try to copy her, but I can't. My voice cracks and breaks and hisses. I sound like a car radiator. So my mother, the pro, she says, "You're going to speak all of your song lyrics." So it's opening night of The Princess and the Magic Pea, and I'm so excited. I go to the curtain like you're not supposed to do, and I open the curtain up, and I look out in the house, and where's my mother? She's not there. But then suddenly, In the back of the theater, I see these massive Jackie O sunglasses come in, and she sort of scopes her way through the back. She looks like some missing character from a James Bond film. She looks for a spot where she can sit, where she can simultaneously watch and escape at the same time. She's got her program up to sort of shield herself and keep the voices inside and at bay. Now, I am dressed in a black catsuit that looks like something Bob Mackie designed. I'm all ready to go on stage. The show starts. My crown is on. I'm loud. I'm so loud you can hear me outside. And I sing like Rex Harrison about all the virtues of my princess daughter. I'm a triumph. After the show, all the senior citizens rush the stage. And they're like, "We love you so much. You're the only one we can hear." And I look over their heads and I'm looking for my mother. And I'm looking for her. And she's not there. She's escaped. I know she's proud of me because she tells me so at home. My mother gives me the only thing that she has, how to act like somebody else. And I get really good at it. In high school, I'm voted the most talented in my class. I even get to sing in front of my largest audience ever, 3,000 people at my high school graduation. My mother doesn't come. The voices begin to win that year, and I lose her piece by piece. But my mother was right. It's all a gamble performing. It could go wrong, but it probably won't. And most likely, it'll be great, and everyone will love you.
I have this mandolin. My parents gave it to me. It's a beginner's mandolin, but after playing it for 14 years, it's broken. Last spring, I finally bought a new instrument, a nicer one, and suddenly I'm able to do things that I wasn't able to do before. It was like graduating from your training wheels to an 18-speed bike. But I can't bring myself to get rid of the old one. I don't need it. I've outgrown it. I won't play it again. But it reminds me of my parents and a happier time. Sometimes we're just too close to our families to see things objectively, to see what we need from the relationship. In this next story, Tori Brogan is offered the space to let go and redefine her relationship with her family.
Imagine yourself standing in front of a raging fire, and you get to throw into the flames anything from your past that you'd rather forget. If given that chance, what would you let go of? I'm 23 and living back at home again. I'm a new college grad with a liberal arts degree and no money, so this is my only option. I've left behind big city life on the East Coast to live in a remote mountain town in New Mexico. I love New Mexico, but I'm not happy about being back at home with my parents. And it's not that I don't love them, it's just complicated. It's hard to go back to that daily parent-child dynamic when you've been gone for a while. And then there's my dad. He's a complex, angry man. His unpredictable temper is legendary. When I'm a little girl, I hide in my closet whenever he gets upset. It's quieter. I feel safe in there. And I spend my time daydreaming about what my life is going to be like. And I promise myself that I will leave this crazy house as soon as I'm old enough. So to be back there now as an adult, sleeping in the bedroom right next to my parents, it feels like a major failure on my part. But now when my dad gets mad, I don't hide in my closet. I'm a grown woman, and frankly, there's no room. That small walk-in space is packed to the gills with stuff that I have accumulated over the years. In my closet, I have a trunk, and in it are yearbooks and old tests and papers, journals going back to when I was 8 years old. There are boxes and boxes of photographs and their negatives, including this gem of me in 5th grade where I'm wearing a mullet and glasses and braces. I have every letter and every card I've ever received, including a letter from the Rick Springfield fan club dated 1984 when I thought he was so cute. All these things, they make me happy to see. But they also remind me of the painful parts of my childhood, all the hiding that I had to do. I'm caught between longing to remember and wanting to forget. Honestly, when I look at all the stuff I have, it just feels like a dead weight. I wish I could get rid of it all and start fresh. But I don't have the heart to throw anything away. My grandmother always said, "Be careful what you wish for." And I remember this on the day the National Park Service lights a controlled burn in the forest surrounding my town. It also happens to be my 24th birthday. And this controlled burn quickly gets out of control. Some people take it seriously. I drink a beer and watch my neighbors pack furniture into U-Hauls and make contingency plans. Instead of gathering my things, I wait and I watch, mostly in denial. When the fire finally does come to town, I'm not even at home. As soon as I hear about the emergency evacuation order, I call my mom. She frantically explains that they have 10 minutes to get together their things before the fire department comes back and escorts them out of town. "What do you want me to bring?" she asks. And my mind goes blank. I mentally scan my room and my closet, and all I can think to tell her is, just get out safely. After we hang up, I decide I'm going to try to get back home, just in case I can get something. But as I get closer to my neighborhood, I notice how thick the air is with smoke and the strong smell of campfire. I seriously doubt the fire department's going to let me back in. Instead, I decide to join my friends. They are part of a search and rescue team, and I join them, and together we work road closures for the rest of the day and into the night. When I finally do meet up with my parents again, we sit together and watch news coverage of the fire on TV. At one point, we realize that we're watching our neighborhood. And then we realize that the structure engulfed in flames in front of us is our home. It's gone. Everything is gone. The fire was devastating. Over 200 homes were destroyed in my community, including my family's, and we lost everything. Ironically, I consider it to be one of the most positive turning points of my life. After the evacuation, I never lived at home again. It completely changed how I related to my parents. It freed me from old ghosts, and it gave me that fresh start. However, I was unprepared for how disorienting it is to lose everything. The things we collect in our life, they serve as guideposts that help us find our way back to the people and the places that we've been. And without them, there is an overwhelming feeling of being untethered in your own life. It's a complicated grief that lacks any kind of ritual for closure. Over 20 years later, and I still sometimes find myself looking for something, only to remember, I lost that in the fire.
When my wife was pregnant with our second child, we turned again to the ritual of picking out a name, and we went back to some of those lists that we had made for our first child, but they didn't seem quite right. Until my wife finally said, "You're named after your father's best friend. Why don't we do the same?" And suddenly everything felt into place, and it just felt right. And I knew that my son would be born not just into our family story, but into the story of our chosen family as well. Randy Ford is going to share with us the story that he was born into and how his family's identity is reflected in his own.
I was just trying to eat my DQ chili dog in the passenger seat of my mom's car. It was 10 o'clock at night, hadn't eaten all day. I was starving, but I couldn't eat because I was also bawling. It was a really sensitive time, and my mom was sharing new information I had never heard before. Some of the story I knew, but the new information was hitting me pretty hard. The whole story started way before I was born. When my mom was a kid, my grandfather, her dad, would drink a lot. And when he drank, he would get violent. Never toward my mom or my aunt or my uncles. It was my grandmother who took the brunt of it. She was a very strong woman. She was a special woman in my life. She also knew when she had had enough. And one night, in the middle of the night, she packed up all 5 kids, the little bit of stuff they could get in the car, and drove the family from Ohio to Tennessee to stay with family. This was a really tough time for the whole family, and they all took it hard. Suddenly, a family is split, all kinds of causes going into it, new schools, new homes. The one who probably took it the toughest was the middle kid, my uncle. He had been really close to my grandfather and was really upset by the family being torn apart. Never quite forgave him for that. When he turned 18, to get away from the drama and tension, he joined the Navy. And it was a pretty peaceful posting he had, 1978 Australia. There wasn't a lot of action going on, which is probably why it was an extra surprise that day when the Navy casualty assistance officers showed up, timed to show up at precisely the same moment on my grandmother's porch in Clinton, Tennessee, and my grandfather's front porch in Dayton, Ohio. My uncle had been on leave that day and riding around town with a friend. Someone ran a traffic light, and as he turned to look, he hit his temple on the dashboard. There was only one injury in the entire accident, and he didn't survive. There was already a lot of other stuff going on with my family during this time. In fact, my mom was 5 months pregnant with me. She was pretty young, so even though she says that she has no regrets about having me, I also think that if she had had a vision board at that time, I don't think I would have been on it. But the whole family was ready to support the new baby, and everybody was pretty excited. There was a lot of talk about what my name should be, and a lot of people on both sides of the family who thought I should be named after my uncle just a few months after he passed. There was one holdout, my grandfather. Just as my uncle never forgave my grandfather for tearing the family apart, my grandfather never forgave himself for what came after. He felt like it was his fault that the family had split up, driving my uncle to the Navy, which would make it his fault that my uncle was on leave that day and riding in that car. Probably blamed himself for the person who ran the traffic light. When it came time, they were thinking of other names. On Labor Day 1978, my mom went into labor, and in the hospital, they hadn't made any decisions. And as they wheeled her into the delivery room, my grandfather ran through the halls of the hospital and found her gurney and said, "You have to do it. If it's a boy, you have to name him Randy. You have to. Okay? You have to. He has to be Randy." This is the part I was learning for the very first time while I was trying to choke down that chili dog. It was 10 o'clock at night, and we had just left that same hospital. My grandfather had just died. The lung cancer had spread all over his body. My mom was telling me this for the first time. She also said that even though he wanted me to be named Randy, the grief was still so deep, still too fresh. He couldn't even say my name. For the first 6 months of my life, I was known to him simply as Papa's little man. He loved me all the same. He just couldn't call me by my name or by Uncle Randy's name. That was a big year for a lot of reasons. A lot of tragedy, a lot of sadness, but it was also a year in my family of birth, of reconciliation, of sobriety. My grandfather and my grandmother got back together and lived in Tennessee. They were a couple there for as long as I knew. And he also stopped drinking. I never knew him to be a drinker. The Papa Ali I remember was always had oxygen tubes up his nose from the emphysema and lung cancer from years of living pretty hard. I remember him always sitting at the yellow Formica kitchen table that was speckled with snuff spit, working crossword puzzles. He only had an 8th grade education, but he could work any puzzle from any day of the week in ink. It was at that same table where he would play Yahtzee and backgammon with my grandmother all hours of the night. I remember when he was in charge of the kids, my brother and cousins, the meal he would most often serve was Frosted Flakes with extra sugar on top, even though he himself was diabetic. In fact, we loved watching him prick his finger to check his blood sugar a couple times a day. I don't know why we loved it as kids, but we did. He'd always say, "Oh," and then cackle when he saw the looks on our faces. I never knew Uncle Randy. He never knew me. I'm told we're a lot alike, that we would have gotten along pretty well. I also never knew that other Papa Ali. I don't think that he is the kind of one that I wanted to know. I think the Papa Ali who was in my life was the person who was supposed to be so special. The other thing I'll never know is what that time was like, those 6 months when there was no Uncle Randy and there was no Randy. It was just Papa Ali and Papa's little man.
Last spring, my wife and I decided to put together our wills should anything happen to us and our children would need somewhere to go. The whole process is very easy. You can do it all online now, but it's not official until you have it notarized. And I didn't do that for over a year. I think I was avoiding it. But if the online process wasn't bizarre enough, imagine walking into a UPS store and asking a stranger to notarize your will, this document that prescribes what comes next for the people you love. In our final story, Julie Isaacson learns that finding a place for your eternal rest can sometimes be just as difficult as it is to find your place among the living.
To die for. How often do we hear that phrase? That creme brulee was to die for. Did you see that vintage dress she was wearing? To die for. And how about that drummer? To die for. What I'm really in the market for right now is a cemetery plot to die for. I'm trying to clean up my life in neat piles so that down the road, when my soul takes off to what I hope is higher ground, my kids won't have to deal with a bunch of decisions. One thing I needed to solve, like Eliza Doolittle, like what's to become of me, was what to do with my remains when the time comes. The decision seemed pretty clear. Like I should just go be buried in my hometown, Rock Island, Illinois, where my parents are, my grandparents, a whole bunch of relatives, and where I grew up. Figured it would be just easy. And what I liked about that cemetery is it was always very honest and straightforward. You were buried in the order you died. Boom, boom, boom. Next. Well, my eyes were opened when I went to a funeral a few years ago of a friend of mine who I'd grown up with in the community. She was not buried next in line. In fact, she was in her own fresh row, and I couldn't figure out why, but I looked behind and I realized that her in-laws were buried 2 rows behind her, and that one day when her husband died, he'd be buried next to her, and they'd have a nice little family unit there. I thought, well, new rules. This is great. I walked down her road, this longitude and latitude of monuments, and I thought, this is great. I can be down the road from her and 2 rows in front of my parents. A couple of days later, I called the cemetery committee and spoke to a guy, Leonard, who I'd grown up with. He was delighted to hear of my interest in wanting to rest in eternity in our hometown. And I was very happy for the welcome until it wasn't so welcoming because I learned all kinds of rules and regs. I told him about my plot to be near my parents, and he says, well, you really can't be in the middle of a row because those are reserved for married couples. Now, I didn't want to start getting into it with him about the discrimination against single people, but I tried to be creative and open. And I said, Leonard, what if I just buy the whole plot and am buried there by myself? No, that won't work because we won't know in the future who would be buried next to you. And you're not allowed to be buried next to a man who is not your relative. Oh boy. I'm thinking my track record with living men hasn't been that great. I certainly was not worried about the dead ones. So I said, well, walk over here with me to the end of my parents' row. There seems to be a space at the end of their row, row 22. There seems to be room for a single grave here. Oh, no, you can't do that because women aren't allowed to be buried on the end of a row next to the driveway. It's like, you know, Leonard, this can't really be a safety issue. I'd already be dead, right? He says, come with me. And I wanted to see what clever plan he had come up with. We walked right past my parents' graves, and now he's showing me in row 23, very close to them, a little space about this wide. Like maybe for my dog. This looked like a pet cemetery space. I said, explain. He says, well, we could move dearly departed Suzanne over a little bit and tuck you in right here. I said, let me understand something. I can't be in the middle of a row because it's for married people. I can't be buried next to a man I'm not related to. And I can't be on an end cap. But you're willing to move a deceased person who's been there for many years already and her monument over? I said, and how do you think her family would feel about that? He says, oh, I'm sure Suzanne's family would be delighted. I said, this is not acceptable. I said, come with me. We walked over to the old part of the cemetery where my grandparents are, a couple of uncles, one of whom died a couple of years before I was born. There seemed to be a single space next to him. I said, Leonard, look at this. It's next to my relative. It's not on an end cap. It's in the middle. It's in the middle of a row, but a single space. How about this? Well, that would be great, except someone's already purchased that plot to be near his uncle on the other side. I threw up my hands in the air. I was out of ideas. My blood pressure and temperature were both rising. And I said, he said, well, think about it. I said, well, Leonard, I'll think about it, but you haven't really given me much here to think about. On my 3-hour car ride back home, I spoke to a high school friend of mine telling him about this dilemma. He says, well, I've got a perfect solution. Come be buried with me. He was now divorced from another classmate of ours. He says, I've got a plot all set up in the Catholic cemetery 6 blocks away. You could just come be buried there with me. Isn't this rich? My community, where I grew up, given me all this trouble about a gravesite there, and I would be welcome in the Catholic cemetery. Well, I had been out to that cemetery, and right next to his grave is a larger-than-life statue of St. Michael wrestling the devil. I thought, I just don't think I can do this. I don't know this statuary. It would give me a heart attack. And what about my parents? They would be rolling around in their very well-placed graves. I continued to drive, and when I got home, I settled into the sofa, and I looked on the shelf, and there was my urn holding my beloved dog, Murphy, who I had lost a couple of years before. And I thought, this is the answer. I can take all the guilt off of my kids for not going to visit my grave in Rock Island, because why would they ever go there? They live in California. They're never coming back. I thought, take me, take Murphy, take us for a nice long walk on the beach. Dad always said, last one out of Rock Island, turn out the lights. Dad, my hand is on the switch, and I'd be on my way. And what makes this decision so monumental is not needing one.
My children will be among the group known as the pandemic generation. But I hope as they look back, they don't remember all those uncertainties and fears that we've gone through in the past year, but they remember a time when we all just stayed in the house as a family and got to spend a lot of time with each other. I hope that as they grow old and they move away from us and into their own lives, that's some of the memories that they take and hold most dear. Tonight, we've heard stories of finding ourselves among fires and mandolins, acting lessons and wills, births and deaths. But as we leave all that stuff behind, I hope that we can all remember that we do have families and that they play a large part in making us who we are. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Sean, Tori, Randy, and Julie. This is what we leave behind. Good night.